Well, good morning. I am Pastor Susie Hutchison, so let me extend the welcome that was offered earlier. I am grateful for each of you who choose to worship with us. When I look around, I am reminded of the Imago Dei. That's a fancy church way of saying the image of God. It's present in every person, and I give thanks for the beautiful mosaic that gathers both in person and online. It reveals to us just how beautifully diverse that God is. We can't know all of God until we know all of each other. So thank you for bearing witness here to that Imago Dei that you carry. Today, we're beginning a short series on the Bible book of Ruth. We don't often take the time to read that book. It's found in the Old Testament, also known as the Hebrew Bible. It's a short book found between Judges and 1 Samuel. And if you've read the Hebrew Bible, you know that a good portion of that massive text is about identity. The Israelites were a fairly small group of people living in a very diverse world. If you look at the map, you'll notice that the land marked Judah, that's where they lived, and it's a land bridge. You can see here that you couldn't get by land to or from Egypt and the rest of the resource-rich Africa without traipsing through the land of the Israelites. If you were Babylonian or Persian and you wanted access to lands around the Mediterranean, you had to go through the land of the Israelites. This means that quite often there were people settling in Israel, in the Israelite nation. And more often, pockets of folks from other parts of the world would settle there, come to decide to quit their journey before they crossed over that Sinai Peninsula. Or maybe after having crossed it, they were too exhausted to continue on, so they would settle in the land of the Israelites. After crossing the desert, they were so tired, they would just decide, maybe this is paradise. So the land of the Israelites has always been diverse. With that kind of diversity often comes a desire to differentiate your culture, to define what makes you unique. For the Israelites, the thing that set them apart was their belief in Yahweh, the God of Moses and Abraham. Much of the Hebrew Bible speaks to the struggle to retain their faith in Yahweh in a world filled with other gods. Sounds kind of familiar to us, does it not? In our world, people don't often call the things that they worship a god because they like to retain their attachment to Christianity or whatever faith. But their primary identities are in other things: their job, their nation, their education, their status. When a conflict arises between Yahweh and their other gods, they bristle, and the little gods seem to win more often than not. Like so many stories in the Hebrew Bible, Ruth's story is about a lot of things that go wrong in life. It's a story that no one would choose for themselves. But it's also a story about strength and perseverance and relationship. Let me set up this story for you. It takes place at the same time as the book of Judges. There's a famine in Israel. A woman named Naomi, which, by the way, means pleasant and gentle. She and her husbands and her 2 sons, they leave to find a place to live that is not suffering from famine. They land in a place called Moab. Moab was a veritable oasis in the desert. But the people who lived there were notoriously in conflict with the Israelites. So the family settles in for some number of years. Then Naomi's husband dies. She's a widow with 2 sons. And that's a pretty tough life. I'm not sure how old her sons were, but with sons, Naomi at least had some protections within the social system. She still had value in the eyes of her culture and world. And eventually her sons grow up and they marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. Now, I don't know much about Moabite society, but in this era, it was mostly true that a married woman cared for her mother-in-law. And we find out later that these daughters-in-law have converted to the faith of their husbands, where we know that that was the tradition. So Naomi was cared for by Orpah and by Ruth. Now, about 10 years later, the sons die too. So now Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah have no men to provide for them or to protect them. They are in pretty dire straits. Sounds like they may have become gleaners. Do you know what a gleaner is? Some of you do. Good. In Leviticus, people were ordered to leave the edges of their fields unharvested so that people who needed food could come and gather it. And it wasn't unique to the Jewish culture. That was kind of how they took care of the poor in all of the cultures in that time. But Naomi gets word that the famine in Israel has ended. So she and her daughters-in-law quit their work in the fields and they head down the road toward Judah. 3 women traveling alone. It's a pretty dangerous situation. So we meet these women in verse 8 through 21 of chapter 1. Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go, turn back each of you to the household of your mother. May the Lord deal faithfully with you, just as you have done with the dead and with me. May the Lord provide for you so that you may find security, each woman in the household of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and they wept. But they replied to her, "No, instead, we will return with you to your people." Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Will there again be sons in my womb that they would be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters. Go, I am too old for a husband. If I were to say that I have hope, even if I had a husband tonight, and even more if I were to bear sons, would you wait until they were grown up? Would you refrain from having a husband? No, my daughters. This is more bitter for me than for you, since the Lord's will has come out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth stayed with her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Turn back after your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me, and more so if even death separates me from you." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her about it. So both of them went along until they arrived at Bethlehem. When they arrived at Bethlehem, the whole town was excited on account of them, and the women of the town asked, "Can this be Naomi?" She replied to them, "Don't call me Naomi, but call me Mara, for the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has returned me empty. Why would you call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has deemed me guilty?" Now, I told you that Naomi means pleasant and gentle. Mara means bitter and has an implication of strength. You see, Naomi, who had long ago left Bethlehem for Moab with her husband and her sons, she was a pleasant and gentle woman. But life happened. We might say she was jaded today. Life had run her over, and she was stronger, but less gentle, less trusting of the world's goodness. Life has a way of changing us. Naomi has suffered terrible losses. Her husband, her sons, her daughter-in-law Orpah. And Naomi has done something that most women do not do in her day. She and Ruth have traveled unaccompanied and unprotected by a man from Moab to Bethlehem. That's a hard journey for any person, for any woman, and I'd imagine it is worse for a woman of Naomi's age. Her journey has fundamentally changed her, made her tougher, and made her a little jaded. She has a journey she never wanted. She has a journey that no one would choose. Have you ever had to walk those kinds of experiences? My nephew Sam was 4 years old when he started to complain about his legs hurting. After a few complaints and a few tears, his parents took him to the doctor. The doctor sent him to the hospital. And there he was diagnosed with cancer. And then a few days more, it had a name, stage 4 neuroblastoma. Not what any parent wants to hear. It would be a 5-year journey. A few years into that journey, I remember my sister-in-law, Margot, telling me that she was listening to her favorite podcast. It's one where 3 sisters live different places around the country, and they call and talk to each other about rather mundane things. And on this particular day, which I think it was Thanksgiving or around there, one of the women was complaining about something her child had done. She seemed to not be able to let it go, and one of her sisters responded, "Could be worse. At least your kid doesn't have cancer." And Margot said it hit her like a ton of bricks. She was the person nobody wanted to be. In the eyes of much of the world, she had the worst possible life. Life is hard. Most of us have lived at least one storyline we would not have chosen. A disease, a divorce, a death, a feeling, a failure, a love, a loss. What's the story that you do not want? You probably can't get rid of that story, can you? You already know that. You've tried, right? You've tried everything in your power to write a different story. The book of Ruth shows us that we are not alone. Other people tread the same path. And when we dare to accept it, there are people willing to journey with us into those unknown, scary, and even dangerous stories. See, when we love each other well, when we choose faithful companions during the joys of our lives, we have partners to walk with us through the hard days. Orpah, Ruth, and Naomi, they shared the heydays of their lives. They were there for each other while Naomi's sons were alive. They shared the everyday struggles of household life. They shared hopes and dreams and expectations of a future. And they shared the tragedies of death and fear and hunger. Orpah stayed through all of that. She even set on the road to Judah with Naomi and Ruth. Orpah loved Naomi, and Naomi loved Orpah. Do you have friends like that? Do you have friends who will sit with you at the doctor's office and take notes so you don't forget anything? Which friends can you call at midnight when your child has not returned home? Who can you ask to clean your house when your back aches or your MS relapses or your leg is casted or your depression just overwhelms you? Those are the Orpahs in your life. They are the ones who won't run away when the story turns ugly. They are valuable treasure. And then when Naomi had a plan, when she dared to imagine returning to her old life. She told Orpah to return to her own life, and Orpah did. But Ruth did not. Ruth says, "Don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me, and more so, if even death separates me from you." Ruth was bonded to Naomi. She was committed to being with her, not merely through the good days, not merely until she got over the crises of the bad days. She was committed to being with her as she grew and became, as she recreated herself. Ruth chose to love Naomi no matter what. Do you have a Ruth in your life? If you haven't tested it, you don't know. Maybe you think it's the person you've known the longest, or the person you spend the most amount of time with. But that's not often how it ends up. The Ruths are not always the people that you expect. Should you find yourself in a story you don't want, I hope you have some Orpahs, and I hope you have at least one Ruth in your life who will love you all the way through to redemption and renewal. Whether you have a flesh and bones Ruth or not, my friends, you are not alone. God walks with us through the good days of plentiful harvest and loving families. God walks with us through the days we're crumpled in the shower sobbing and carrying the weight of our shame in our hearts. God walks with us as we begin to dream a new dream, write a new future. God is with us when we lay a new foundation, when we fail, and when we try again. And God calls us, this community of Christian people, to be Ruth for each other. Look around you. Look at this beautiful, great Imago Dei. Look around at the wealth of experiences, trials and triumphs, births and deaths, redemption, reconciliation, and renewal that is gathered under this roof and has gathered digitally with us. None of us has lived your exact story. But together, this mosaic of our lives and experiences, these folks assembled here, we are your Ruth. We are here for you from the moment that we committed to you at your baptism to the day we sing at your funeral. And we'll be there on the day that we celebrate our resurrections. Life is hard. It is going to change us. But God remains steadfast. And this community will be your Ruth, refusing to abandon you, seeing you through. Amen.